coincidentally, I've been thinking a lot about the idea of visual arts in an Indigenous world. And for us, visual arts is usually part of, it has a purpose or a function that is usually spiritually aligned. So you don't make visual arts for the aesthetics. You make them in honour of someone or peoples or families, or it's about relationships, and it's about togetherness, and it's about community. You appreciate the aesthetic beauty, but it's not something that you just hold up to look at or go and visit just to look at without some intention, without some consideration of relationships or thinking about other people. And so for me, what I've just been thinking about is the idea that for many Indigenous peoples, and certainly for my people, the performance arts and visual arts are one. And the purpose is usually to please and to build relationships with one another, whether it's building relationships with the living or building relationships or continuing relationships with ancestors. So there's this, it's all about family and community. Within that, you might have costuming, which is visual. You might have props that you use, which are visual. You might have song, dance. I mean, there's any number of things that make up that art form, but we don't think of it as art.
Yeah, those
so art is it's a lens that's been put on us to talk about us, but it's not necessarily how we think about it. Whereas we're more, not to say that we don't have that as part of our lives every day. Am I making sense about what I'm trying to say? It's not that we don't think about the songs or the music or the dance, but that there's an integration of aspects that come together as part of that, and it's usually for another purpose.
So that really putting a really very easily understood framework for me to understand why when somebody's ancestor's photograph appears on Facebook without a credit.
Yes, exactly.
Why hundreds of people around the world go, take that down.
Exactly.
You've got no right to do that.
Exactly. And that's kind of what I'm saying. And so, like, we've all grown up in two different ways of being at least, if not more. And one side of that is that we've been taught to appreciate art through a very non-Māori or non-Pacifica lens. And art in that way is about looking, visual arts, is about looking and analysing whatever it is and responding to whatever it is. And it might be in a spiritual way, but it's not necessarily in a spiritual way. It's definitely an aesthetic way. And it's definitely, there's a whole philosophy around how you perceive art, visual art. And the same with performance art, right? But from an Indigenous perspective, art is something we use as a vehicle to connect.
So in an Indigenous framework, it's the blanket rule, whereas in the Western framework, it's a
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's why we get so upset. You know, when things aren't understood in the way that we perceive them. Because, again, it's this... And why I've been reflecting on the writing of people about art, performative and visual. It just strikes me that every time I read something, I'm like, oh, this is, again, it's through this lens of the framework of art that's not Indigenous. Like, so...
sorry, I'm just having a visual image, and you'll have to put a flash up of the difference between a beautiful Samoan bride's dance for her husband on the day that everybody gets to see, and hot gossip from the Kenny Everett show.
Oh,
I haven't seen that.
that's old. That's a really...
I'm going to find it.
Okay. So, with visual art, so we're looking at...
So think about the objects in the museums.
Yeah.
That's the perfect
It's
example,
art.
right? So from a non-Indigenous perspective, you go in there, you look at the things and go, oh, that's really pretty. Oh, that's really intricate. Oh, that's quite amazing. Oh, how did they do that? From an Indigenous perspective, you go in there, you look at that and you go, oh, what's that for? Who is that about? What is the relationship?
I just thought of a cool piece of art.
Yeah.
Like, you could do amazing Indigenous whatever, and then just give people something like a tiny glass to look at it.
Yeah, well, that's what it feels like, right?
It,
so that's kind of how it feels. It feels like we're fragmenting the idea.
Yeah.
So instead of having this complex where it's connected to so many different other things. And so what got me thinking about this is we have, sorry, I'm gone real philosophic straight away, but we have at home in my peoples, we have song, dance and story that can be about the exact same thing. So the story explains the details. So that's usually just for the clan. And all the little special pieces of information and messages you need to know about that story are included in it. That's the full narrative. Then there is a song which summarises, hints at, uses metaphors. So it's not completely explained out, but if you know the story, you know exactly what that song's about. And then the dance is like the emotive symbolism to help the intention and the connection to both the living and the dead, or the living and the continued ancestors, or the continued living ancestors.
Yeah, we are our ancestors.
Yeah, so the three can't be separated. They are one.
They're like a rock opera.
They're like a rock opera.
Sorry,
I hate to say it, but they're kind of like
it's
what's this, like Wagner's concept of opera.
Yeah.
It's an art. It's a complex art form. It's all. It's everything together.
Yeah.
It is not. You can't separate one out of the other.
No,
and the visual arts comes into that too. So lots of things that we see in.
That's what makes me.
So the costuming, like the skirts, the what you wear, the you might use props. All of that is symbolic and part of the story.
Yeah.
But that story has a purpose. I'm
finding we're finding examples. It's popping into our heads of Western norms that fit that description, but it's not the rule.
No.
So I wouldn't say that Bohemian Rhapsody was especially spiritual. Not really.
Bohemian Rhapsody?
I don't think so.
I think they were tapping into something.
No. Oh, no. Well, I think we tap into it as...
Oh, no, I mean, the movie? Or do you mean the song?
No, I haven't seen the song
The
itself.
recording of the song, I think they were tapping into something big time.
Completely
they were out
bonkers.
there. They were just like, woo!
But as a cultural marker, it speaks to me about the era and the hilarious things we used to do in the car singing along to it.
Oh, totally.
Which most people our age can relate to.
Yeah.
At some point. It's either the Wayne's
You know,
World
they
version
didn't
or
want
the
to
family
record
version.
it.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't want to make
And
it
let's
the
face
song.
They are
It's pretty...
the geekiest rock band ever. They're such nerds, all of them, you know.
Love it.
From Brian May right through to Freddie Mercury.
The
Professor
ultimate
Brian May.
nerd.
Yeah, exactly.
Dr. May. Professor May.
There's so many examples, like you say, and I think, you know, Hair or Starlight Express or, you know, all of those. But Wagner in particular for me was a lovely example because of the posters were so beautiful. You know, Art Deco classics. But
And it's not to say that aesthetics aren't important in our cultures, because they are. Because it is about the intent and the detail. It's just that there's a purpose behind that intent and that detail.
Hey, when you're talking about and let me know if it's the kind of information that doesn't go outside certain circles. But you say that the art forms hint at something that you will only understand fully if you have the knowledge beforehand. Is that something that you have to actively seek from your parents and grandparents, or do they give it to you anyway?
It depends on the person. Again, like Māori, we have like certain bloodlines are privy to more information than others, and that simply is about protecting the information.
Sure.
It's not that the other. I mean, things will be shared, but not everyone holds. It's kind of like a basket. So everyone will hold bits and pieces together. That story is strong. But in order to protect it, not one person will hold everything. So the hinting at, I mean, the stories are always genealogically and land associated. There's never a story that is not related to that. And so that's why they're protected as well, because they prove the line of descent in those areas. Does that make sense? So, I mean, there are stories that aren't like that, but there will still be stories about your ancestors, and there'll still be stories about who you are. They don't necessarily have to be 100% based on the land, but they'll usually point to areas on the land. So, you know, it is still about history.
Ahoy, Ron.